Well, who is Robert McAfee Brown? And I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to tell you. Robert McAfee Brown was actually one of the most influential Christian theologians in America of the 20th century. When I was in seminary some 30 years ago or so, I remember reading about him. And when I was in seminary, I was a Presbyterian, and he was a Presbyterian as well. And there were quite a few things about him that I found both a little disturbing as well as really attractive. Robert McAfee Brown was known as a person, first of all, who was very, very much against war. He actually served in World War II in the Navy and served as a chaplain, but during the Vietnam War, as he was discovering that American military were bombing entire villages and killing innocent people, he basically stood up publicly and said, I have to disagree with this. And he got so involved in the anti-war movement that he actually went to the draft board of San Mateo County, where I used to live, on the San Francisco Peninsula, and basically with other clergy, other ministers and rabbis, basically blocked the entrance just to make a statement saying we disagree with what our country's doing. Now, I grew up having, I've told you this before, as a congregation, my mom was a Democrat that was very anti-war, and my dad served in World War II, who was a Republican, and I remember some of the dinner table conversations that were a little tense, but I didn't know at the time about Robert McAfee Brown. They had heard of him by reading in the newspaper, but much later I would be reading all about him as I was a seminarian, and he was a significant person that really tried to help people understand how to take the scriptures and figure out what applies to today and in what ways. He was also known as a person that was a champion of the interfaith movement and interfaith dialogue and activity. His philosophy was, if there's people out there that are different from you, it is much better to spend time with them and talk to them rather than just talking about them. So he made an effort to spend time with Jews and Muslims and people of all different faiths to share his Christian faith, but also to say, I'm not here to convert you, I accept you as you are. The other thing that he was significantly known for was the company he kept. So he would spend time with people and visited with people like Fidel Castro, the president of Cuba. He also visited with the Pope. He spent time with Joan Baez, the popular musician back in the 70s. And I remember living not too far from her and actually knowing a little bit about her at the time. But I remember when I was learning about Robert McAfee Brown back in seminary and also rereading the book that he was really good friends with Elie Wiesel, who just died earlier this year, who was Jewish, a leader, an author, and somebody who wrote some of the most significant things about the Holocaust, having gone through the Holocaust himself. I'm sure some of you have read his memoir, Night, about what it was like being a boy growing up in a concentration camp run by the Nazis and just how fearful and scary that was. Well, on the back of the book, Elie Wiesel actually writes this about Robert McAfee Brown after he died. I shall miss him every day while writing every page. I have rarely met a man of such faith, integrity, and compassion. As a teacher, he influenced generations. As a friend, he was the best one can dream of. As a Jew, I saw in him the nobility of what Christianity has to offer. So as I was reading the book and reminding myself of the things that I learned about him in seminary, there were many pages about war and peace and life and death and the importance of respecting authority and government, but also knowing that if your conscience tells you that what your government is doing is just wrong, when to stand up and speak, and so on and so forth. But there's one part of this book that stood out for me more than any other part. And as I read through the whole book, and then went back and looked at the places where I dog-eared and made some notes, this one poem, I think, encapsulates his entire message. It's actually written by his granddaughter by the name of Mackenzie Brown when she was 8 years old. Listen to this poem by Mackenzie Brown. It's called If I Had a Magic Wand. If I had a magic wand, I would make everybody nicer. I would make the poor have some money, make the people who are sad happy, make the people who are sick healthy, make the wars stop so there is peace in the world. Everyone would be friends, and no one would be afraid of people who are different. If I had a magic wand. Such a simple message. And yet, as I read all this deep theology and political stuff and social stuff in here, I realized that that poem, which came right after the prologue and introduction and right before chapter 1, was really what the whole book was all about, and therefore what Robert McAfee Brown's life was all about. This past week, as I've been thinking about the Christmas story, it also occurred to me that this poem is what the Christmas message is all about as well. Making people nicer, stopping the wars, more peace, feeding the hungry people. It's really the message of Jesus. And the Christmas message itself is really all about all of the message of Jesus, which kind of disturbs me because in the last 2,000 or so years after Jesus, I have to think that we haven't done that great of a job of really making the Christmas message happen. There are still poor people, there are still hungry people, there are still sick people who are not comforted and healed, and we have the means to comfort and heal them. There are still people suffering that don't need to be suffering. And yet for 2,000 years we've been promoting this message, and every Christmas we celebrate it, and I wonder, why have we been such a failure at it? Robert McAfee Brown actually addresses this in his book and talks about how it's so important to keep moving forward with this message and to keep doing all that we can do. A couple weeks ago, I talked about peace and some of the things that I had learned about peace simply by Googling during the week. And I learned that, frankly, there have been wars and armed conflicts every single year since World War II. I also learned that more Syrians have died in this current civil war than all of the Americans that died in World War II. That includes Pearl Harbor, the entire Pacific Basin where my father served, and Europe. Everybody that was American. More Syrians have died in this current civil war. And then I've also realized, just through Googling armed conflicts and seeing where all the battles have taken place, that more than 50 wars and armed conflicts have taken place in 2016 alone. And that data is probably over a month old by now, which tells me that every single week on average, a war has either started or continued. Over 50 just this year. And again, I asked myself, why have we been such a failure in doing this? And so, as I was reading Robert McAfee Brown, he basically said, well, it's really important that we all work on this together, not just the Christians, but Jews and Muslims and Hindus and people of no faith at all, that we promote peace, which was the message of Jesus. And he says, the Jewish question really is, there is so much evil in the world. Why doesn't the Messiah come? And then he, after that, says, and the Christian question is, the Messiah has come. Why is there so much evil in the world? Mm-hmm. As I was contemplating the situation in the world today, it made me think why we even bother sometimes with the Christmas story. Why we gather every year and tell it over and over, and yet we every year look at the wars that have been happening, and we look at hunger, and we look at people who are sick, who aren't healed and aren't comforted simply because of either politics or people not really caring. As I looked at the big picture and I thought, why do we bother? My answer is we bother, or we are committed to the story of Christmas because this is one of the few reasons that we still are even around as human beings. And every single time we do something about poverty, we make a difference for some. Maybe not all, but we make a difference for some. And every single time we feed a hungry person, we fill the stomach of some. And every time we help somebody who's sick, we help someone. And every time we do something for peace, even though we're not ending every single war right now, we're making a difference for peace for some. And my friends, that's what the Christmas story is all about. Not giving up because we make a huge difference for some. And we have to be committed to making that difference, knowing that every time we reach out to someone with compassion, with grace, with kindness, there's a ripple effect that just keeps going further and further out, way beyond the horizons of what we see. We know that our kindness and our compassion and our sense of justice makes a difference in ways that we will never see in our lifetime, and right now is making a difference all over the world. Earlier this month, I was kind of blown away when I got a letter, a note, an email from a woman living in Germany who happened to see one of my sermons online, on YouTube. And then she watched another one, and just felt like she had to write to me to tell me how much she's appreciated the sermons from this church and what a difference those sermons have made for her in Germany. And as I've been thinking about how difficult things must be in Germany right now and all throughout Europe, it gives me great pleasure to know that this church and our ministry and our message of Christmas and of the entire Gospels is making a difference in Germany, in Europe, and I know that this woman is sharing that difference with others. So do you see that even though it gets discouraging, and even though there are still wars and there's still sick people and there's still poverty, every time we do something for someone and every time we tell the Christmas story, it makes a difference. And it keeps rippling somewhere out there in ways that we never even see or probably even won't even imagine. As I was thinking about that simple poem by Mackenzie, the 8-year-old granddaughter of Robert McAfee Brown, I had to read it over and over and over this week because I knew that if we truly believe in the Christmas message, we believe in this poem, and we will make a difference for some. So in closing, I would like to read it one more time, very slowly, and as I do so, I invite you just to pause and think about what you might do today, this week, and in the weeks to come, to make a difference for some. And if it helps you to close your eyes as you imagine how these words might become a part of you, I invite you to do that. If I had a magic wand, I would make everybody nicer. I would make the poor have some money. Make the people who are sad happy. Make the people who are sick healthy. Make the wars stop so there is peace in the world. Everyone would be friends, and no one would be afraid of people who were different if I had a magic wand. Amen.
Amen.